Hi teachers, today we're talking about how to teach the Little Prelude in C minor by Johann Sebastian Bach. This is BWV 934 and it sounds like this. And it goes on from there. This is such a beautiful piece and it shows up on a lot of exam syllabi, so I think it is one that is common for students to play. I don't think it's an easy piece, and as I was preparing this video, there were so many things that I felt like I could talk about, as well as so many things that I was thinking, this makes this piece difficult as I'm looking at it and playing it myself. So if you do not already have my repertoire difficulty worksheet, which is a free download from my website. I'm going to link that in the description of this video because it's really helpful with intricate pieces like this to have a good sense of what exactly makes them difficult. As far as difficulty goes, this is listed at the RCM on their level 6, and for my Illinois colleagues, this is on our AIM level 7. And I do think for those levels, it's a little bit tricky. I would put this just barely easier than the invention number 1. So if you're thinking about how difficult inventions are, this is pretty much on par with that, maybe just ever so slightly easier. Okay, so let's dive into the main features. This is such a melancholy character that we find in this piece, and I think it's a great vehicle for your student learning how to play Bach expressively. So many times students come to me in lessons, or if I'm judging a festival or an exam, they come and they play their Baroque pieces like finger exercises, like they are not expressive. And that really just pains me because I'm sure Bach was an expressive player at the organ and the harpsichord and everything else that he played. He wrote so much music that has so much emotive content to it that I think it's really our job as teachers to help our students emotionally connect to Baroque music, which is, pretty much the farthest away that we can get time-wise from our current culture. It's been a long time since people were playing this music when it was written. So that's partly our job, is to help facilitate that emotional connection. I think secondarily, the other obvious main feature of this piece is that it's in a simple polyphonic style, meaning the two hands have two entirely different things to do, and they're both moving all over the keyboard, not in a static way, or with one hand just playing an accompaniment style such as chords or broken chords or Alberti bass or anything like that. Now, that being said, this is not written in the same kind of contrapuntal compositional style as other pieces by Bach, such as the Inventions or his fugues. And so the preludes, both the little preludes and then the preludes you find elsewhere, such as in the Well-Tempered Clavier, they do have more of a homophonic structure, meaning you can simplify them down to a basic chord progression. But that doesn't mean that the two hands aren't doing very independent things. And so I think it's just important to realize that's one of the main issues here. While it does have this chord progression homophonic idea, it is written in this polyphonic style. Okay, so main skills and things that our students need to know in order to play this piece. First of all, the meter is 3/4 time, and the rhythm is quite simple. We basically just have quarter notes and eighth notes. So that is not the problem in this piece. Given that 3/4 time and the structure of how it's written, it feels like a minuet to me in many ways. If you took some of the minuets from the notebook for Anna Magdalena and you made them more intricate, you might get something like this prelude here. And oftentimes when we're playing pieces in the Baroque era that are not listed as a dance title, such as Allemande or Gigue or Minuet, we still have the feeling of a particular dance. So even if you're working on a prelude from the Well-Tempered Clavier, it's good to kind of think, okay, what is the meter and what kind of dance might this be related to? Does this sound more like an Allemande or does it sound more like a minuet? So that's an aside. I feel like this one has a little bit of a minuet character to it. Okay, key signature, we're in C minor with a strong modulation to E flat major. And then of course we also have a lot of the dominant, so we've got quite a bit of G major chords in here. And so C minor and E flat need to be comfortable for your student reading in 3 flats. And also because of that harmonic minor and because Bach does not write anything that is not harmonically intricate, there are many, many accidentals. So your student just needs to be ready to read that key signature well in this piece, as well as read accidentals accurately and remember that they last through the whole measure and all of that. This is in binary form, and so that just means we have an A section repeated and a B section repeated. That is how most of the dance movements in the French suites and the English suites and the partitas, that is how they are written, with that binary form, that 2-part form. This also relates to Scarlatti sonatas, which are almost always written in binary form as well. And in those, as well as the Bach dance suite movements, we start in the tonic key at the beginning of the A section, and once we get to the end of that A section, we've usually modulated to the dominant, or in the case of a minor piece like this, to the relative major. You start that B section, in my edition here, it's the top of the 2nd page, in that key that you've modulated to, and then of course by the end of the B section you have to work your way back to the tonic key. As a little aside, this is a bit of a precursor for sonata allegro form, so I'll let you kind of think about that on your own. Okay. As far as melodic devices go, I love that this piece has so many sequences. Our students need to know what sequences are, both for learning process, realizing the patterns that have been sequenced, as well as for playing expressively, because that is one of the main things that happens in Baroque music, is using these sequences to create intensity and growth, or to take things down a little bit away from being more intense. So measure 5 to 8 has a really clear sequence of the same thing happening twice, first beginning on a C minor outline, and then the same thing is done again in B flat. It's just a direct sequence, one note down. Okay, if we get a slightly more complicated one, but still really obvious, going over to measure 33, we have this lovely twisty, turny sound. Left hand starts on E in measure 33. And then in measure 35, it begins on B, so we've moved down a 4th. And then it does it one more time in measure 37, all the way down on F sharp. So again, down another 4th. That one changes a little bit as it goes so that Bach can end 4 measures later at the final end of the piece on a C minor chord. Now, we have some other examples of sequences that are not so obvious or direct movement just down. The very opening right hand is a great example of this. So the first 2 measures start with these 3 notes ascending, and then some movement down, and then a broken chord. Now, if he had done that directly down a 4th, starting on F, it would sound something like this. But it doesn't quite work. So instead of doing 3 notes ascending, Bach does 3 notes descending. And in addition to doing the 3 notes descending, he actually does an octave displacement. So at the beginning of measure 3, you start with the F here, and then you jump up a 7th, so that he gets to the right hand in the octave that he wants it to be in. So let me just play those 2 sequences back to back, and you can hear, how they work together. It's so beautiful, and your ears might not originally think, oh, that's a sequence. It's much easier to see in the left hand. We have an octave going to a different octave. Now this one, instead of doing that octave jump, it's a little bit like he's displaced it, and he does just a D diminished triad. But I think in some ways that sounds more like measure 1 and 2 than the right hand does. So spend some time yourself looking through the sequences or the slightly altered sequences that Bach has written. Bach is never boring, so he doesn't do things in the most obvious way. He oftentimes changes them around just a little bit, but still using that melodic device. Now, one note about what I was talking about with the polyphonic style versus a truly contrapuntal style. If we were playing an invention and this was the theme, the subject, then the left hand would immediately imitate that. Imitation is the direct repetition in another voice. That's different than sequence. If you think about the first invention, it does that immediate imitation in the left-hand voice after the right hand does it. So again, this is not doing that. This is doing a lot of sequencing and moving in that slightly more homophonic structure. So let's talk about that. I do not expect my students to be able to do this, but I want to kind of give your ears an idea of what the chord structure actually is. So I'm going to simplify this as if a much lesser composer wrote this piece or just wrote out a chord progression. It would be something like this. So that's like a outline kind of blocked version of the first half of this piece. And if you're able to do that, you could play that for your student just to clarify, okay, what's actually going on. You can also take time to just write pop chord symbols in. First measure is C minor, second measure is A flat major, etc., to see what this chord progression is, what's happening, and simplify it a little bit, because most students, when they look at something like this, they're just going to see a whole bunch of notes. And it is a whole bunch of notes, but we want them to see the patterns and sequences, and we want them to hear the overall harmonic movement within this piece. Okay, so the left hand is independent and needs quite a bit of practice to play accurately and expressively and not just be, some notes down there below the right hand. So I oftentimes start pieces like this with the left hand because I want my students to love that left hand line as much as they love the right hand. It has several octaves. Those are fun for students. I love having those in there. So while it is outlining that harmony, it's still an exciting and beautiful version of that. So it sounds to me a lot like a cello line that Bach might have written in a Brandenburg concerto or a cantata or anything like that. If you haven't listened to any Baroque performance practice groups that have, this lovely orchestral or small ensemble, then I would really strongly recommend some listening to that. And I'll put a link in the description of this video because I think it's very helpful for our students to hear Baroque string playing when they're playing this kind of style. That brings me to articulation. I am currently looking at Jane McGraw's Masterwork Classics Level 8. That's the red cover, which is currently coming off of my book, so it's hard to pick this up. And she makes a note at the bottom that the quarter notes should be played detached. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think you can definitely use it as a starting point so that the entire left hand, minus the eighth notes, has this same idea as what a Baroque cellist would do with a bow stroke, but that they're not connected, many notes in one bow. I think that's a simple version of articulation. If you have a student who likes to play more expressively, or if you are trying to encourage a student to play more expressively, you can definitely explore some different articulations. Just listening to other pianists as well as harpsichordists play and listening to their articulation can give you some ideas, and I'm not going to dive deep into that now, but you can certainly employ some two-note slurs on the downbeats to highlight that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I think I did that when I first played this at the beginning of the video. You could just do that on bars 1 and 3 and play those more detached. You can do lots of different things. So my vote is that articulation is an expressive choice. I have an text out here and there are no articulation markings in it. And as I said, McGraw makes that note as an editor that she thinks the quarter notes should be detached. And again, that's a valid point and one worth considering, but I strongly believe that articulation is an expressive choice, and any editor or performer is making that choice themselves based on how they want the piece to actually sound. Okay, as far as the right hand goes, it just takes a lot of practice because there's a lot of movement. There's a lot of sixths. There's a lot of awkward movement in the melodic line. You have to hear where it's going up and peaking at the top and coming down. So these are all things that the teacher needs to go over with a student and kind of evaluate fingering as well as arm alignment behind those top notes. One time when I went through this earlier, I was playing measure 3, and I didn't feel like my A flat really had a lot of sound behind it because I didn't get my arm behind it. So you have to lift up after that F. Which brings me to my next point, which is ornaments. I think they're quite controversial in this particular piece. In my McGraw edition, as well as my Willard Palmer Alfred Masterworks, they look like appoggiaturas. That grace note without the little slash through it, that appoggiatura right before the beat. And McGraw has noted in her realization of these that they should be 2/16 going to an eighth. 1, 2, 3, 1 and 2. There apparently is another manuscript that has a little trill, which would be articulated like this. And I have actually taught it that way before because it's that way in my text. I think that's a similar idea of feeling that non-harmonic tone. You hear a lot of players play this as more like a grace note, like a very short note. I'm not sure why a lot of people have chosen to do that, but it must be a legitimate choice because I hear so many people doing that, including harpsichordists. So I'm curious as to why they have chosen to do that when I feel like it's a non-harmonic tone that should get a little bit of emphasis, that leaning on that F, which is going to the E flat. So my vote would be for that appoggiatura, that true elongation, and something like a 16th note. But again, I think you have a lot of freedom here based on how you want to express this piece and based on which edition you are currently using. I hope that gives you a few ideas on how to teach this lovely, melancholy C minor Bach prelude. If you have any questions about this piece, please feel free to put them in the comments. If you have other pieces you'd like me to cover, please also put that in the comments. Subscribe to my channel, share this video with a friend, and I wish you all the best in your teaching.